What's happening, folks? Arush here, and today we're talking about the cell membrane. We talked briefly about this before, but today we're going to go a little more in depth with it. And just a quick reminder, go ahead and get out your notebooks, and any slide that has this pencil, I want you to make sure that slide ends up in your notes. Okay, so yes, for all videos, you do have to take notes and make sketches. For sure, any slide with that icon, you have to take notes on. Alright, so let's get into this. Go ahead and take a look at this guy. Think about this. Where would you see this gentleman, and what would be his job? And what would he have on that clipboard? What would he be doing? Typically, you would see a person like this maybe outside of a nightclub, and what he's doing is he's regulating who's being allowed to enter and who needs to leave the nightclub. And if your name's on the list, great, you get to go in. And if your name's not on the list, then you may or may not get to go in. So what this person's doing as a bouncer of a nightclub, he's being selectively permeable. He's deciding, does this person look like they'd be fun, have a great attitude, maybe contribute to the nightclub? Or would this person be toxic? Would this person be like a toxic waste and maybe cause trouble inside the nightclub? So he's being selectively permeable, selecting who can go in and who's not allowed to go in, or who needs to leave. This is similar to what your cell does. Your cell needs to take in nutrition and nutrients like oxygen and glucose and proteins, and your cell needs to get rid of toxic waste. Okay, so carbon dioxide would have to leave, and any waste products from your cell. Okay, so what selectively permeable means, it allows some things to enter, allows some things to pass through while not others. Okay, and that's what selectively permeable means. We'd gone over this before, and you may see the same word as semi-permeable. And they both mean the same thing. Semi-permeable and selectively permeable. Here's another analogy. Let's say you're in your house and a total random stranger knocks on your front door. And you look out your window, are you going to let that person in? Well, if it's a total stranger, I hope not. But if it's your best friend, then yeah, you would let that person in. So you would be selectively permeable for your house. You would be allowing some people to enter while not others. Okay, and that's the same thing that the membrane does of your cell, this outer layer. Okay, and today we're going to talk about what makes up the membrane and what are some ways that it does that. So this is the first slide that I want you to take notes on. And yes, you do have to write everything on here. And this will be the bulk. Okay, so this is the majority of the notes. So first, the plasma membrane, or the cell membrane, it's made of what's called a phospholipid bilayer. And I want you to look at that word. Phospholipid bilayer. Well, if you break this part down, lipid, we've talked about that before. Lipids are fats. So you might think, yes, your cell membrane has a component of fat in there. And bilayer, bi means two, so there's two layers, okay? And there's, on those two parts, you have one portion that is water-loving, and you have a second portion that's water-fearing, and we'll get into that in just a moment, okay? The cell membrane also has transport proteins. Now, the purpose for transport proteins is to allow larger molecules to pass through. And there's two types of transport proteins. There's channels, and there's carrier proteins. Now, let's think about transport proteins. If we were to look at your house, how would you get into your house? You would use the front door, right? But now, if you wanted to protect your vehicle, how would you put your vehicle in? Your vehicle would have to use a special area, the garage door. Okay, so if you wanted to put your car in, you would have to use the garage door. It would have to use a special opening, and that's what the proteins are. They're special openings for the cell, and you'll see that in just a moment. Next, we have cholesterol. Cholesterol is actually extremely important. I think cholesterol gets a bad rap because people hear, oh, be careful of high cholesterol, but it's actually needed. You have to have it. It's part of your cell membrane. Now, what does cholesterol do? It prevents the lipid portion of your membrane from sticking together, and it keeps your membrane firm and stable. Now, what's the problem with people with high cholesterol? well, that actually makes the cell membrane a little bit too firm and too stable, and then that could cause complications. And the last thing is there's actually some special carbohydrates that are attached on the cell membrane, and what they are is they're little name tags, and it allows your cell to identify other cells, basically just saying, hey, this neighboring cell is one of us. So let's go ahead and look into this a little more. This is the phospholipid bilayer, and if you look at this, there is 2 layers of this. There's 2 areas, and that's where the bilayer comes from, 2 layers. And if you were to look at this further, this is made of what's called phospholipids. Okay? And the phospholipids have 2 portions. Actually, let's go to the next slide real quick. This slide I'm going to have you guys write down. So this is a phospholipid. And then you would have another phospholipid on the opposing side to make a bilayer. And remember, bilayer means 2 layers. On each phospholipid, there's 2 portions. There's a hydrophilic end. And hydro, what does hydro mean? Hydro is referring to water. And philic means loving. So there's one end that's hydrophilic or water-loving. And there's another end that's hydrophobic or water-fearing. So this head portion, okay, this top portion, we call those the phosphate heads. Those are the hydrophilic end. And this tail portion, this is the part that's a lipid. It's made up of a fat. Now, if you ever tried to mix water and oil, you would see that they don't mix. And that's why this portion is water-fearing or hydrophobic, because these tails do not like water. So if we go back to this slide, you'll see that inside of your cell there's water, and outside of your cell there's water. So what happens is the heads, which are hydrophilic and like the water, they're going to go ahead and face the direction of water. The lipid tails, they're hydrophobic. They hate the water. So what they want to do is they want to stay as far away from the water as possible, and they're going to face inward. Okay? They're going to face inward to stay away. So we have our phosphate heads. They are hydrophilic. We have our lipid tails. They are hydrophobic. Why do the 2 tails face inward? Because they hate water. And there's water. Whoops. There's water outside the cell and inside the cell. Why do the heads face the water? It's because they are hydrophilic and water-loving. So here's what the phospholipid bilayer looks like, or the cell membrane. And very, very small particles or molecules, such as carbon dioxide and oxygen, they're actually able to move through no problem. And why is that? It's because they're so small. They're actually able to fit through these little openings, these little pores, and they're able to move right through the cell membrane. Not a problem at all. But now if we talk about other molecules that are much larger, they have to get in a special way. What they're going to use is a channel protein. And what a channel protein is it basically stays open all the time. Okay? And this will allow larger molecules to pass through freely. Okay? Next we have a carrier protein. Okay, so this is a channel protein. And this is a carrier protein. And the difference between the two, the channel protein always stays open. A carrier protein does not. Carrier protein actually changes shape. So what will happen is you'll notice there's a special spot on this carrier protein for this molecule to attach to. So that molecule will attach to the carrier protein. Once it attaches, it'll cause that protein to change shape. Once it changes shape, that molecule will be released on the other end. Okay? So a carrier protein actually changes shape. Next we have our cholesterol. Now what the cholesterol does is it prevents these tails, okay, from sticking together, and it also makes sure, because if you've ever seen oil in a bottle, right, it's very, very liquidy. Same thing with these tails. They're very, very liquidy. What the cholesterol does is it makes it a little more stable. It gives it some structure, so it's not too liquidy. Okay, it's not too fluid-like. Okay, so all of these are the cholesterol molecules that are wedged inside, in between each phospholipid. And lastly, we have carbohydrates. These little carbohydrates, they're special, and think of these carbohydrates as name tags. What will happen is if there's another cell, bordering cell over here, this is basically a name tag saying, hey, I'm one of you, I'm one of your cells, I'm not an enemy, I'm not a bacteria. Okay? And this slide, I want you to go ahead and give a quick sketch and label. So we have our phospholipid. The phospholipids make the cell membrane. We have our channel protein, which always stays open and allows larger molecules to pass through. We have our carrier protein, which actually changes shape to allow molecules to pass through. And next we have cholesterol. It prevents the lipids from sticking together, and it helps to give the cell membrane some integrity and some structure. It makes it a little bit stable. And the last one is the carbohydrate. This is like a name tag to identify with other cells and saying, hey, I'm part of your body. Okay. And lastly, we have the fluid mosaic model. What does this phrase mean? The fluid mosaic model. Well, this basically describes how the membrane looks. So, fluid, that means that the cell membrane is fluid-like. It's not completely stable. It's not a solid structure. It's fluid-like. Things move around. So if we look over here, these proteins are actually floating around. They're actually floating around the membrane, okay? Mosaic, what does mosaic mean? Well, mosaic is a piece of art, and specifically the type of art that it is, it's a bunch of larger structures that are wedged in there, okay? A bunch of these pebbles or tiles that are wedged together to make a larger image. And model, basically what they're saying is, this represents the cell membrane, okay? So the fluid mosaic model is how the membrane is described, okay? If we look back over here, just like the mosaic is made up of many tiles, the membrane is made up of many different things too, such as the proteins that are wedged in, the cholesterol that's wedged in, the carbohydrates on the surface, okay? And if we were to do a quick recap, the cell membrane regulates what can enter or leave the cell, similar to a bouncer. It's made of a phospholipid bilayer. There's two separate layers. It has hydrophilic heads, which face water, hydrophobic tails, which face away from water. Embedded in the membrane are channel proteins that allow larger molecules to pass through. There's also carrier proteins that actually change shape once the molecules bind to them, specific molecules. Cholesterol prevents lipid tails from sticking together and keeps the membrane firm and stable. Okay, it gives a little bit of structure and integrity. There's carbohydrates that allow cells to identify each other. Think of the cholesterol as like a name tag, basically just saying, hey, I'm part of you. And then lastly, this phrase, the fluid mosaic model, is used to describe the plasma membrane because there's different pieces embedded in there, and it's fluid-like. It's not a complete solid structure. That was the end of the lecture, and make sure to get these all in your notes, folks. Anywhere there was a pencil in the corner, okay? And you guys have a good one. Talk to you later.